Hello, everyone. This is spiritual teacher and intuitive healer Matthew John here. And today I am joined by my good friend, psychic medium, channeler, and healer Adam Bernstein. He's been at this for 3 decades. He is just so full of knowledge, and he's an extremely talented medium and seer and healer. And him and I just connect on so many levels, and I love him so much. So I'm so excited to bring him on my YouTube channel. I've been on his. So welcome, Adam Bernstein. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about, just because you're new to my audience, about your path. It seems to me that one of your strongest skills is, your psychic skills and your mediumship skills. How did you start to develop some of that stuff? When did it start to happen? Were there any, experiences that really kind of opened that stuff up for you?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a few along the way. I mean, growing up, I was always like if there was like a psychic on TV or a real witch, I always had to watch. And then, my favorite shows were like Lost in Space and Star Trek and
Me too.
Twilight Zone growing up. And I grew up in
Oh my God, same. I love Twilight Zone. Yeah.
so all that stuff. So I always had an inclination. Then in college, I had this massive awakening where I just knew that everything that I thought was real was a lie. I mean, that was my reaction. I had this flash. It was like a double flash of light. I
Yeah.
all of my bike crying and was like, oh my God, everything that I was taught's a lie. I need to learn the truth. So spiritual path began in 1979. That was about, I'd say 6 to 8 months, into martial arts training. So I think that helped open up. And also there's some psychedelics involved with
Yeah.
that as well.
We talked about that on your channel. That was a big part of my awakening. Yeah.
I know it was. I know it's okay to talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, a friend of mine and I dropped some really good acid, government test acid. And I actually came down from the trip. It was probably 6, 7, or 8 hours later. I went out on my bike and then flash of light came.
Yeah.
So I really started to get more into martial arts. And when that happened, I started to get very psychic. So that opened up. I mean, as a child, I could predict the weather by the time I was 8 years old.
Wow.
People I didn't even know would ask me what the weather's going to do. Like my mom swears that I was never wrong. I know that's not true. That's a mom, but she swears I was never wrong. So I had that, and I could always sense things. I could always feel things, and I was always aware of spirits, but I never was communicating with them. But I could go to a place. Oh, there's a lot of spirits here. So after this awakening, funny things started to happen. Like I'd wake up one morning and think about somebody popped in my mind that I haven't seen literally in months, and I'd always run into them that day. So that was happening. And then I was finishing people's sentences and they're like, what my mind, you're freaking me out, basically. Feeling the energy, feeling the kundalini. I didn't know what that was. So I started to research that, and I read some Gopi Krishna, who was very helpful. I noticed that I can meditate and breathe and the wind would blow, and as I cultivated that more, I could work with nature and the clouds would build. And I know I was out with my brother and I was meditating on the beach, and when I came out of it, he was like saying, you did that, you made these clouds. And I was like, all right. And my second wife used to always, when we go out, say, stop raising the tempest, stop doing that. So that's something any human being can do, by the way. So I don't want to you guys to think that I'm tooting my own horn, like, oh yeah, I'm so great or whatever. We all have those connections, but
well, think about like the indigenous people when it hasn't rained for a while, right? Doing rain dances, for example.
Exactly. And in the 80s in Oklahoma, my friend Bob Vetter, they had this group called Journey to American Indian Territories. And he had a friend named Bob Fields, and we went out one day, and I'll never forget this because he kind of this is something that Craig Braden talked about years later. I heard him say the same thing with the Native American. He's just saying, when we pray for rain, it always rains. And he's explaining the reason why is that we don't ask the creator to make it rain, because then we're only reinforcing the lack of the rain. But what we do instead is we feel the rain hitting our skin.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Plants growing. We smell the rain, and we thank the creator for the rain that's already falling.
Yeah. That's like law of attraction 101, isn't it?
basically, I didn't know what law of attraction was.
Right.
I was very interested in the Native Americans, like very interested
Oh,
in
but
that.
same. Yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and that was just like that just made so much sense to me. And it's like, yeah. So, you know, I mean, basically I was having experiences like that. And then I had, not, maybe not coincidentally, I had a spirit guide that they went by John, basically. And I think it was John from Revelations, that John. I think there were
Yeah.
2, 3 Johns in the Bible.
Mhm.
I think it was that John. And according to other texts that go into more esoteric Christianity, like they were doing things like mushrooms and having visions and stuff like that. So it would make sense because a lot of this was psychedelic also a
Yeah,
lot
sure.
of the period. And basically what was happening is, I was getting like my skills as far as like energy were getting really good. Like I could, meditate or do Tai Chi on a field and animals would come up to me,
Mm,
fly overhead. But I was
yeah.
getting very, I don't know what the right word is, ungrounded, very uncomfortable with people. I was isolating more and more. If my buddies were going out, I'd have to have a drink. Otherwise, I just couldn't handle the energy.
Mhm. Yeah.
And more that was happening. And one day I went to the top of one of the hills in Oneonta, New York, where I went
Mhm.
to college. And when the sky comes through, it's like everything gets very still. The birds stop. It's very kind of like, I don't know what the right word is, almost like very ceremonial in a way.
Yeah.
And the message is rarely more than 3 or 4 words. So the message was, you've gone as far as you can go. Now you've got to go back into the world. So basically, what's happening is I was lacking that earthly experience. So I was lacking my root and my sacral chakras. I was all in the upper chakras, and that's why I
Yeah.
was so freaking sensitive to people and energy in the first place. Like the white pine trees here come down in the storm, but the birch trees stand in the storm because they have the deeper root system. So I had
Right.
no root system, so I was feeling everybody's freaking emotions and complicated energy. And my God, within a year, I mean, I even did jail time. I mean, I went from being this place of like, I am such an enlightened being, to
Yeah.
being in jail and being in the belly of the beast, and then kind of clawing my way out. And I feel like I'm still in that process, and some of these old gifts that came to me at that time are really starting to come back now. So anyway, that's a little bit about my awakening story and how that I knew that I was psychic. And then in Oklahoma around the same time, 1983, I met Anne Barella, who's since gone on to Spirit, who's a tarot reader. And my friend Bob Vetter again, he invited me. We did like a women's self-defense class at the university in Norman, Oklahoma. I think that's Oklahoma U, not Oklahoma State, I believe. And so one night, she was doing a tarot reading. I was just peeking around the corner, like the cards just drew me, they fascinated me, and I was peeking around. She knew that, she sensed it. And the only other place I'd seen tarot cards was the James Bond movies. I didn't know anything.
Right. Right.
I forgot which one, but he would draw the lover's card, and of course James Bond would get the girl always. Or Sean Connery was very handsome. So and anyhow, so she basically she gave me a book, she gave me a deck of cards. She said, "Here, study this." And for 48 hours without sleep, I stayed up and I studied the cards, and I did readings. I did the meeting, I did readings, and then I slept for 10 hours straight after I was up for 48 hours straight. And then she started to give me her tarot clients, and she's saying, "You've done this in other lifetimes. Just trust." That's what she's telling me.
Really? You got just like thrown right in.
Yeah, she just,
Wow.
well, she's a
I haven't, that's
palmist.
a very unique way
Yeah,
to just get started.
no, she's a palmist, and she did tarot readings, but she preferred palm readings. She just gave me clients, and it was hysterical. I was like coming through a book doing readings, but
Yeah, that
so it's kind of funny, but it was a good experience.
for
So
sure.
so in the 90s, I started to do readings professionally at a Wicca, like a craft
Yeah.
shop in called Enchantments in the East Village. They've since changed managements twice since then, and moved, and all this other stuff. So I started to do it professionally. But what happened developing my mediumship is that gradually around 2000, I'd be telling people, like, I get feelings from the other side, and I would say, I'm not really a medium, but I feel like this person's here and saying this. And I'd say 80% of the time I was right, not 100%. And then it started to get stronger. And I remember there
Yeah.
was 3 things that happened, and one of them was was Janet Woodbury. She's an astrologer in New Jersey, and I did a reading for her, and I described, this mother figure, and I, described her and how she passed, and
Yeah.
she said, well, the person you're picking up on is Phyllis Woodbury, and Phyllis Woodbury is a very famous psychic in the 60s.
Interesting.
70s. Next to Jean Dixon, she's probably the most famous psychic back then. And when I was really curious if I was really a medium, and then that was the other piece. John Edward came on the scene.
Yeah.
And I've heard of him before that, and I would every now and then, and when I was doing like readings or doing candles, like prayer magic candles, every now and then somebody said, have you heard of this kid named John Edward from Long Island? He's fantastic. He's 16 years old.
So he was only 16. He was a kid, really?
Yeah, and he was doing psychic fairs at 16. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's show Crossing Over came on, and he was explaining how he got his information. And it's like, this is what happens to me. This is what happens to me. Everything he was saying, this is what happens to me. So it's really curious.
Yeah.
And, spirit works in mysterious ways,
Yeah.
I was really curious. So they sent me somebody for mediumship reading, and then the manager, Lynn, looked at me, and I said, I'll take the reading. And I went to the back and I meditated. I don't know who my guides are, but other than John and a couple of others, but if I meant to do this, what I want to happen is to get, specific information, not just your grandmother's holding cookies that says, I love you, but specific validatable information. And I didn't care. And I think that's the key, is that I had no attachment to any outcome here. It's just like, if I'm supposed to do mediumship, show me. If I'm not, don't.
Wow. That's powerful.
And at the time, I knew of John Edwards' mentor, and I can't remember, Shelley Peck. And I'd seen her work at the Queen Psychic Club. And, she would go up to the people and get their names and get the messages and all that stuff. And I was like, well, she's fantastic. But in my mind, it's like, but they're dead. So what? They're dead. So my mind, I didn't really see the value of it. So that's an important piece. I had to throw that in there. So anyway, fast forward back to whatever year it was, 2000, 2001, I think. So this guy's, middle-aged man comes in, he shakes my hand, and right when that, I get father. I feel a sharp pain in my chest. I see an airplane. I see the letters REN, and there's one other piece. I can't remember. There's 5 pieces that came in. Like the letters REN, sharp pain in my chest, father, airplane. I forgot the 5th piece. But anyway, so basically, when I put that out, and the number 10, that was the 5th piece. Okay. So he said, well, my father, and he had a long Middle Eastern name that started with the letters REN, died of a heart attack 10 years ago, and he was an airplane pilot.
Wow.
So I got that. So I was like, all right.
Yeah.
Then as I was doing the reading, I started to learn that the father is very critical of his son, because in his eyes, his son was a reflection of him. And he started to tell him that. He's saying, he's apologizing for being so hard and so critical of you. And then he started to cry. And I was like, okay, spirit, I've never done this before. I've got a grown man crying. What the heck am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
They just said, lighten it up a little bit. So he talked about some other thing. Long story short, at the end of the session, of the 1-hour session, he shook my hand and he said, for 10 years, I've held on to this guilt and pain. 1 hour with you, I can let it go forever.
Yeah. And this is the power. This is the power that, we hold as mediums, as psychics, where we can, and I have to say, that I really can relate a lot to the way that your mediumship came about, because I also, in a lot of ways, kind of stumbled into everything that I am now doing. I have very little training, really, in reality. In reality, most of what I've learned has been through trial and error, with some books in between, and with some pieces of advice from others along the way. And for example, like with myself, with direct mediumship, for the longest time, although I was doing readings, I started doing tarot readings back. I started working at a tarot shop here in Rochester over a decade ago. So I was doing readings, and I was looking into people's soul contracts and soul plans. But I had this resistance to actually doing direct mediumship for someone for like a spirit on the other side, I guess I was kind of creeped out by it, you know? And
I didn't see the value, so
well, yeah, and
I learned the
the
value
reason,
that one spring afternoon. I not only learned I could do this, but I
right?
learned how to do it.
For me, it started happening where I started being on with clients doing my what I call my soul plan readings, which I still do this to this day. And I would just start to get this real strong feeling that there is kind of their loved one trying to connect. And at a certain point, I just couldn't ignore it anymore. And I just kind of started trying it. I just started kind of saying, well, I'm getting this feeling, and it seems like this is kind of what they're telling me or showing me. And it would always be, oh my God, yeah, that's my mom, or that's my dad, or that's my brother, or yeah. And then I started really, and so often it would be followed by tears, and I started realizing the power that, how directly and efficiently and quickly we can help someone by connecting them with a loved one on the other side. Because a lot of people have this illusion that loved ones on the other side are still mad at them or are not forgiving them. And spirits on the other side they're nothing but forgiving, because they're no longer in this density of the earthly body. They're in a place of such lightness that they often want to, in one way or another, let the person on this side know that there is no resentment anymore. There's nothing. And a lot of times they want to apologize too. A lot of times after they passed on, and I'm sure you've experienced this, there was something they did or the way they treated someone that they want them to know. So a lot of times I think what happens is they lead them to a medium like you or I, and they can get that message and get that resolution through us.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Here's a good question, and I'll ask you, and I'll comment as well. What would you say are the signs that someone is meant to be a medium?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think, having a lot of empathy, I think, feeling spirits or having that sense. Sometimes it's just an interest. Sometimes people that had those abilities just want to see mediums, and they're drawn to see mediums. So that could be another sign as well.
Yes.
So, that can come up. I mean, there's a whole plethora of things, I'm sure.
There are. So I would agree with both of those. People that are naturally very empathic and empathetic, but also people that are natural feelers, like being able to feel other people's energies, for example. Sometimes people, without even knowing why, they're basically sensing others' thoughts, right? They're sensing others' emotions, like going on, you and I are both from New York. It's like if you go on the train and you are just like, you're not in control of it, but you can just sense that this guy next to you is like, grieving, or this lady next to you is super happy, or this one is angry, right? You start to feel that. And yes, the interest in seeking out mediums, so many people, they seek out me, and then one of the things they end up getting from me is like, I can tell that you are meant to be and it's not something I say to everyone. It's something I say to the people that I feel that you are meant to be a medium, And then you and I are both astrologers, and I see marks in people's charts. So for example, and there's a lot, 1/12 of the population or something like that is going to be like this, but just having, Neptune and Scorpio, for example, or even Neptune and Pisces. We're right now, everyone being born right now is being born with Neptune and Pisces, right? So that's 1/6 of the population.
My generation, I was born in the Neptune and Scorpio generation.
You were? Okay, there you go. And that was going to be the next thing, seeing Scorpio marks in the 10th house, like either a Scorpio midheaven, like you have.
Actually Libra midheaven, but
right, or even having something like Neptune in the midheaven, or Pluto in the midheaven, or just any of those Scorpio marks in the midheaven. Scorpio North Node as well. Any aspects, especially benevolent aspects, that Neptune is making in people's charts often can point to mediumship. And Pluto we can take into account as well, because Pluto is a ruler of Scorpio. Scorpio is the realm of
The eighth
spirit.
house.
The eighth house as well. The eighth house is the house of the other side, and then the 12th house we could say is the house of all things unseen.
Yeah,
Right?
that's where my Saturn is right on my ascendant, like sitting over my ascendant in the 12th house, which one astrologer said it's kind of like having a thumb on you all the time, isn't it? I was like, yeah, having
And also that might be a
yeah,
heaviness of like past life karma, that,
yeah.
to always have to try to take one step past, or else you might find yourself getting dragged back.
That's it, exactly. Yeah.
I had this fear around, the direct mediumship for a while, and now I've actually expanded that into doing direct trance channeling of extraterrestrials. Every month on my Ascending One calls. By the way, all the info on Ascending One is in the description box. But I channel a group of Syrian extraterrestrial beings. At my retreat recently, I was channeling all sorts of different extraterrestrial beings. So this fear that I had, ultimately, it was just kind of a fear of the unknown. We all have the fear of the unknown, but I do see it as the number one block, in my opinion, for developing mediums. Is there's just a fear of, it can be, what if I connect with a nasty spirit or a bad spirit? What if I get like attacked or taken over by a spirit? What if I get something wrong and I tell someone something, and it has a negative impact on their life, right? And so what advice would you have for people in kind of overcoming some of these typical fears?
Yeah, you just can't worry about it. I mean, I know that's easier said than done.
Right.
These are all ego attachments, and we have to rid of. Now, I in doing mediumship 20 years now, I've had two, maybe three, but two I can remember spirits that were, not, I wouldn't say nasty, but weren't quite right.
They weren't real friendly.
Yeah, I mean, one was a guy that committed suicide. I picked that up, and it was like a weird reading, and all of a sudden it dawned on me, it's like this being is not really evolved on the other side, and he's just getting off on confusing me. And I told my sitter that, saying, your friend is just trying to confuse me, and he thinks that's funny, basically. It's like, yeah, that sounds like him.
But, and to clarify, those spirits that are gonna play tricks or those are the type of spirits, for example, that people communicate with Ouija boards, which I always advise people to stay far away from, because they
have a qualified medium, at least, if you're going to do that.
Well, yeah, or even better, there's no reason to go to it. It's rooted more in dark magic and dark spirits than light, right?
I did that one Halloween, one Samhain night with my group years ago, and it was the psychic circle. It's sort of the modern Ouija board. And they would go round and round, and then it spelled M, and round, then A. And at 5 minutes later, it's like Mary hugs, we spelled out. And I'm thinking, I could have gone that in a microsecond.
Right, exactly. It's also quite slow, right? But what I was going to say is, like, the types of like spirits that will harass or confuse, or those are spirits that aren't on the other side. They haven't crossed over into what we might call heaven,
the light, exactly,
or the in between, in between lives, into the light. They're earthbound spirits. So, and the reason they're earthbound is there's some sort of negative emotions that are holding them, whether it's resentment or anger or desire for revenge or confusion or whatever. And in general, there's no real reason to communicate with those spirits anyways, unless you're trying to help them cross over, which is a thing that you can do.
I don't really do. I mean, I've done it.
No, and it's something that some people are super called to do, like go to a cemetery, or go to a place where there was a war, and try to cross over trapped souls. And that's such a wonderful piece of service work, like in the whole context of the ascension. But you don't have to do. What I'm trying to say is, like, if you want to be a medium, you get to choose. You get to choose who you work with.
That's the other
and when.
thing I was going to say when you asked me what advice I have.
Right.
Like, you get to choose. Surround yourself with light, whatever that means to you. Archangel Michael, Jesus, Buddha, whatever that means to you. And set your intention. The intention to move mountains in the spirit world.
Yes.
And people don't understand it. It's really not hard. We're complicated. We're hard. They're not. The spirit world's not.
Very true. They are much more direct. Spirits are much more direct, honest, and uncomplicated as compared to the human ego.
Exactly. Yeah.
because they don't have a human ego anymore.
Right. 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 I mean, some carry, well, a little bit of it, but yeah, exactly. And
Well,
so yeah,
I would agree, but I would say they carry the positive aspect, like
yeah,
the personable, the charismatic aspects, as
yeah,
opposed
yeah,
to
yeah,
the
exactly.
jealousy, the resentment, that's human stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they
Right.
have no need for that. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Um, and it's kind of like we have to trust, be in the heart space. That's always your point of power.
Right.
You talk about heart brain coherence a lot as a
Hmm.
practice, and cultivating the frequencies of the heart. Mediumship is an act of love. It's an act of compassion.
Yes. And it's an act of
Oh,
service, I would
yeah,
argue as well.
service. Yeah,
It's an
that's
act of
what
service.
I
It's
thought.
something we use for good. It's
Yep,
something we use to help others.
yep,
Right. And I see so much more value in that than in, no offense to John Edwards or whatever, than in the entertainment side of it.
right, right.
I understand there is an entertainment aspect to readings, like literally legally in our state, but also like in general, yes, doing tarot parties and psychic parties, like of course, there's a fun aspect to it, but the way I see it is ultimately we are doing a divine service.
Exactly, yeah. And John Edward, yeah, he's a show person, I get that, but he would always talk about the spirituality, which that's what I liked about him. Like even on the show, he'd talk about the spirituality behind mediumship and really try to educate people. So, I appreciated that
Yeah,
about
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
No, I have to say, I've heard from a lot of people over the years that did go to see him in person, and I've heard nothing but glowing reviews, actually,
yeah,
of him. Better than some other that I won't name, more famous like TV mediums. I've heard the best about John, by far. So
yeah. This is
let me
one
ask you this,
phenomenal.
Adam. What advice would you have for someone that has aspirations of becoming a medium like you or I, but they feel blocked not because of like what we talked about already about fears of what could go wrong, but more because they don't feel like they can receive. Maybe they don't think their third eye is open enough or their crown. Maybe they feel like they try to get into meditation and connect, and they just get confusion in their mind.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, meditate. So
Yes, get into a space. Now, here's what's and just sorry to interrupt, but here's what's interesting. I teach this in my tarot class, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but this is just the way I teach. Is at a certain point, and it's not to be arrogant, it's just to be kind of realistic. Is I could do a tarot reading or a mediumship reading if I wanted to on the back of a turnip truck going down the interstate because I practiced with it like almost every day for over a decade, right? And you've been
right,
practicing even longer than me. Like people that are very refined. It's like a professional golfer. They could go without practicing for a while and still shoot a subpar on whatever course, right? But for people that are starting out, it's so much more important to
yeah,
get yourself into a meditative space beforehand, right?
yeah. Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I've had experiences working in bars and loud restaurants.
Exactly, yeah. And we can
That
still do the work, but because we practice a
practice
lot with
to get
it.
in that space, but the thing is, people need to meditate. It's hard for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and sometimes I'll just tell people, well, just do 2 minutes. Start with 2 minutes. If you can
Hmm.
breathe and hold your presence for 2 minutes,
Yeah.
then go for 3 and 4, and because their minds get in the way, and I
It
think
is the key to
yeah,
quiet the talkative, chatty parts of the
exactly, yeah,
mind, because that's what'll interrupt whatever the messages from spirit are, right?
exactly, yeah, yeah. So
How
that's
does one differentiate, in your view, a message from spirit versus the words of their ego?
couple of things. One, practice. Yeah, and the more you do, the more you know. But there's a whole different feeling, and spirit messages, they're uplifting. Even if they're talking about so-called negative things or challenges, it's uplifting.
It
There's
is. That's true.
courses of action that you can take. It's not doom and gloom.
Yep.
And when it comes from the ego or the subconscious mind, our egos penetrate the subconscious mind. That's why people have selective memories and all
Hmm.
these other psychological
Sure.
problems.
Yeah.
And there's usually an anxiousness or a fear or I want to show off, I want to be, bigger than but when it comes to spirit, it's uplifting the heart. You may feel the chills, or
It feels good. Messages from spirit feel
exactly, it
expansive,
feels good,
right?
exactly.
They feel heart expanding. And yes, a lot of times you might get, and that's something interesting too, is like starting to recognize what cues you get physically when you're having an authentic connection with spirit. I started realizing way back, even before I started doing professional tarot readings, just when I was kind of in a stage of exploring, going to Mexico, whatever, and and meeting people, and I would just be doing readings, just trying it out, and it's like I started getting these chills, right?
Yeah,
Kind of these really good feeling chills, and like I still get those to this day if I'm on the phone with someone and I'm doing a reading and I feel, let's say, a connection with their mother or their grandmother on the other side. That's an indication to me that this is an authentic connection and I'm going to listen here. So start to pay
yeah,
attention to what cues you get in your physical body.
right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, and yeah, and with practice, you start to be able to discern. Because there's times I get a little bit stuck, and there's a natural tendency to start to draw on the personal mind, and that's when the
Right.
reader starts to
That's a great
interrogate.
point. Is some advice on giving readings is to be patient. And
Yeah,
I've learned this. You never want to rush, because if you rush, it's more likely that your ego mind is going to just kind of fill in the blanks, but it's
yeah,
not going to be accurate. Don't
yeah,
be afraid if you're either face to face with someone or if you're on the phone or Zoom or whatever. Just tell them, like, I always say now, I'm just like, I'm going to be silent for a minute or so here. And they're like, okay. And I just make sure that I'm seeing it clearly or receiving it clearly
yeah,
before I start to speak.
yeah. That's a good rule of thumb for sure. Yeah.
Because you want to make sure you're not like, and that's a question that people ask. How do I know I'm not making it up? Right.
That's a great question, because it all comes through the imagination. It all comes to the same part of the brain. So we
Right.
daydream.
It's coming,
And
especially if you're seeing. If you're
yeah,
seeing, it's the same part of the brain.
right, seeing or feeling, even, or hearing, it's all comes, our imagination, that's image, right? So there's the seeing part. That's where imagination comes from, the word image. And so it comes from the same part, but again, it's how you feel. There's a different resonance, there's a different feeling that when you're making it up versus and yeah, when I do my mediumship courses, that's a very common question that comes up for people. Like, how do I
Yeah.
know? And, you really just have to just say what you get, and sometimes it's hard. And I'll lead circles. People will get great information, but when you're out there and it's not a supportive environment anymore, it's a whole different thing.
It's true. Yeah. It is more challenging once you get out into the field, so to speak, and start doing readings, especially professionally. One thing that I found extremely helpful personally is, I could look back with confidence on my body of work and say that I'm right a lot more than I'm not right,
Yeah,
which is a really good indication, of a good medium and a good psychic. But I always like to look back when someone comes back to me months later or weeks later or whatever and says, oh no, actually this happened and it was the opposite of what I predicted. I like to look back in my mind, and a lot of times, because I love using the tarot as a tool, especially when
yeah,
like looking into the future. And I like to see, all right, what went wrong? Why did I pick up the opposite, and kind of self audit? And I find that to be very helpful in refining your craft. And for me, most of the
I
time,
do the same.
especially with the tarot, it's that I bought into the other person's hopeful story. So, for example, like a marriage that, and I can always look back and be like, you know what, I had this subtle feeling or relationship that it was going to fall apart, but I let them talk me into it. I let their story talk me into it. And then when I laid the cards out, I use that lens of their hopefulness to give them that, reflect that back to them. But I can remember, oh, inside I had this subtle feeling like, I don't know about this. And it's always that subtle feeling,
Yeah,
especially when trying to predict the future, that ends up being right.
yeah, I can relate to that. I've had similar, and it's kind of like we feed into their energy,
Exactly.
feel like they're, when you're an empathic reader, it's like, if you get delivering unfavorable news, you're going to feel like uncomfortable energy from your clients. So, there's always
And,
that.
if you're going to a reader, a tarot reader or a psychic, a lot of times, boy, I've had this experience many times in my life. You can talk the reader into telling you exactly what you want to hear, but it might not actually be what you need to hear or what is actually going to end up happening, right? So really the best way if you want to get accurate kind of stuff from a reader is to be as neutral as possible and as open as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. And it makes a big difference, especially when we're talking about psychic readings, tarot readings. The more open the sitter is, obviously, the more you're going to be able to read. Now, mediumship, you're really connecting more with the spirit than the human.
Right.
Anyways, but still, the human can resist. I mean, this is something that I'm working on in my mediumship because I've worked with some British mediums and people, and they say it doesn't matter what if the sitter's skeptical. It doesn't matter this. You're working with spirit. You're not working with them. And I try to remember that, but I still feel their energy, so it still trips me up a little bit sometimes. But
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's up to us to, as best we can, stay neutral. Which is exactly why it's nearly impossible, or at the very least, very difficult to read for oneself accurately. I almost never actually, and people might be surprised by this because I literally teach tarot, but I rarely use the cards to read on myself. I used to a lot, and it turns out most of my readings on myself really weren't all that accurate because I'm too invested in my own darn story, right? And the same with like people super close to you, family members, etc. It can be hard to really kind of act because it's hard to separate yourself neutrally. But doing it professionally, if you can be in a neutral state, that's when you're going to get the most accurate stuff, both with tarot and any sort of divination or mediumship, right?
Yeah, I definitely, I agree.
So what about like trance channeling? So tell me a little bit, how did you start to develop this relationship with it's the Council of Light? Is that what you call?
Yeah, the master teacher.
The master teacher. Sorry. Okay.
So, I mean, most of the channel I'm doing is conscious, so I don't really call myself a trance channel. I use a lot of blending techniques when I do mediumship. And the master teachers, they identify themselves, they're interdimensional, they're not physical. They work through humans, they work through the human instrument and a lot of it's energetic. So when I do the channeling, people feel the energy, they feel it's running through their body, or they feel their skin or whatever.
Cool.
From around 2010 maybe to 2013, I sat in on a lot of circles of the local Australian channel in my area named Susie Mazzoli. The interesting thing is I had not had the best experience with channels before. Like at one of the expos I worked in, some guy was channeling some called Irish spirit named Ezekiel, which isn't even an Irish name, and talking this phony Irish brogue when they were coming in and just kind of spouting spirituality 101. And it said, I know this guy's phony. So I didn't have the best impression of channels to begin with. But when I saw her flyer, something told me, like Spirit said, no, you need to go to this one. This is different. And the first time I went, it's like I nearly fell off my chair. The energy got so strong. And then I worked with them for 3 years. And a couple of times they said, or Susie said, that I'm going to be channeling the master teacher. And I'm like, in my ego is like, oh no, I'm a medium. I'm not a channel. I'm not going to do that. That's not my thing. Well, lo and behold, during the lockdown, maybe the second year into COVID, they started to come to me, and I started to channel. I started to do it on Facebook, and and again, it's almost a similar flavor than when I started mediumship. I was like, Spirit, prove this to me. I'm not going to freaking do it. Basically, I'm going to waste their time. I'm not going to waste my time. So I did it, and I had at least 3 people email me after that saying, during the channeling, their crown chakra blew open.
Awesome. Yeah.
Colors, they're seeing shapes.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it was like a damn experience. They were
if you're meant to, it's the way I see it is if you're meant to have a trance channeling or whatever you want to call it, channeling connection with a spirit or an entity or an angel or an extraterrestrial, it's going to happen one way or another.
Right.
Like I believe, even though I just started directly channeling the Syrians last year, it probably was written into my plan. It's something I planned,
Exactly. Yeah. And it started, maybe a year and a half, 2 years tops. And then within a year, I started to do light language and toning. And I
Nice.
play back some of the videos, and there's two voice I've heard, and they validated, and sometimes there's three voices coming out, not just two, there's three. And I listened, and there's different tones. It's almost like there's harmony, and it's
Yeah.
like stuff like that. So it's like really wild stuff. And then I caught a few orbs during when I was channeling.
Yeah, nice.
Moving
One,
orbs on the video. Yeah.
one piece of advice I would give to people, and I wonder if you agree, is, when it comes to like channeling, trance channeling, etc., don't force it. Don't make it happen. It's better to wait until you have a strong calling for a particular, whether it's Archangel Michael or Thoth or the Sirens or whatever, because I do notice that, especially with YouTube and TikTok, a lot of people, like everyone and their uncle now, claims to channel Archangel Michael, right?
All spiritual teachers,
and they're not all accurate. A lot of it, I believe, is people's egos, because they're trying to force it because they want to get views and so on and so forth.
Exactly. Yeah, cash in on the spiritual movement.
Exactly. So wait until it's a real strong calling, and then keep playing with it, and learn what does it feel like in your body when you are connected. And like when I'm channeling the Syrians, I feel, first of all, super high, like I'm on some sort of psychedelic or something, right? And it afterwards, usually takes a little bit to get grounded again, and I feel, even after, I might feel like elated for hours. But I there's a feeling that I know now when I am connected. I hear the words come in, and then it comes in as energy, and then the next step is I hear the words in my head, and then the next step is I kind of go over those words, and then spit, they come out my mouth. And sometimes I will briefly lose the connection, and instead of forcing it, I just say to and this is live with my audience, I just say to my audience, okay, I lost the connection, just hold on. And I wait, I'm patient until I feel it back. Don't force it.
Yeah. And sometimes that'll happen, and then they'll come back, and the master teacher will come back and say, because say, I lost I'll say whatever, I lost the connection, whatever. And then they come back, and then they'll be like, no, we never left. The channel goes in.
Oh, of course, they don't leave. It's you for whatever reason, you get distracted or ego gets in the way.
Talk about it,
right.
We never leave. It's the channel goes in and out, but we're always,
of course, of course
talk about it. But it's primarily an energy channeling that I'm doing, and
that's cool. Adam, one of the things that I love about your work is you do a lot of predictions. Like, what do you see life looking like on the planet, let's say in 10 years?
Okay, well, firstly, they show me Russia and the U.S. becoming allies towards around 2030. So there's like that piece. Feel like I was seeing like a split in society. So there's those that really want to keep developing organically versus those that are okay with interfacing with technology and buying into that whole thing. A lot of pressure to centralize things, but I don't think it's going to get as bad as what it could be. And
I agree.
I want to say
I've seen that split as well, Adam, where it's like part of society chooses to really interface with AI and live more in the big cities, New York, Philadelphia, Tokyo, etc. But then there's this whole other faction of society that moves out and forms communities where we're doing organic gardening, raising our kids, teaching our kids, where it's more like Lemuria versus in the cities where it's more like Atlantis.
It's like what we're meant to be. These are all like, they're very tempting, these things that are coming out, but it's taking us away from our power. And that's what people have to understand. Like, it's great that there's going to be med beds. I mean, they've had those probably 15 years by now, or that technology, but not at the expense of learning how to heal yourself. And and I think that's where people need to sort of draw that distinction.
It's an interesting point. Yeah, it's like the extraterrestrials, that have the way I see it, that have the med beds, they've already reached a point anyways where they're able to heal with their consciousness, and it's simply
Exactly,
a
yeah.
tool that is kind of at the same frequency as their overall collective consciousness is. So for us, it's so much ahead vibrationally of where we're at as a collective that we can't really match with it. So if it exists, it's still in
Right,
secrecy, because the point is us waking up on our own and
right.
learning to self-heal through the power of our consciousness.
Right. Because we have in our DNA, we're equipped to heal virtually
Right,
every disease under the sun. We
right.
have that ability. Now, I'm not against technology. I think it's a great thing. Congratulations if they use it in the right way.
What do you see the energy resources on the planet being like? Because we can't be using oil in 10 years, right?
No,
I hope not, at least.
not the way that we're doing that. And I don't think like the EVs is the answer either, because they're big polluters for another reason, and the electric vehicles, I mean, and so I it's just I think they're going to start to maybe open up some of Tesla's research.
Exactly. The scalar technologies.
Yeah, and how to use that. And I
Yeah.
feel like Spirit's talking to me saying they're already doing that. They already know how
Oh,
to do.
I'm sure in secrecy, yes. But it'll finally, hopefully, if we're on the requisite timeline, start to be available to the public.
Yeah, because there's going to be, I mean, there's a lot of revolutionary energy, so there's a lot of clashing, and I feel like there is a period of food shortages, maybe going to 2024. 2024 is a big year. I mean, I know that as an astrologer, in 2025,
Why?
with the
Because of Pluto?
Pluto and Aquarius, this is in your neck of the woods. I don't know if you're going to see totality on the April 8th eclipse.
Yes. Right over my head.
I'm going to try to get out to Lilydale then, and
Yeah, come up over here. We have totality. Yeah. No,
yeah,
those eclipses are big. Food shortages, just to bring a little bit of dose of reality, are right now, and they have been forever. It's
I
just
know.
that in the West,
It's the
we've
amount
been fortunate enough to
yeah,
not. And I don't think personally, I don't see food shortages ever being a widespread problem in the West in this
I
decade. I
don't
could be
either.
wrong,
Don't either.
but the third world, I think, keeps getting. It's a horse that keeps getting kicked while it's down, unfortunately, because the oligarchy just keeps pillaging the third
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, that's basically what, when I was doing the predictions last, it was like channeling. They're kind of saying the same thing. It's like, all right, we had the resources, the manpower, all that to feed this world 10 times over, yet half the
I know
world's hungry. So, a lot of exposure, that's the main thing the next couple of years, a lot of exposure of the lies, the agendas.
that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think it's so significant that UFO disclosure has begun over the
UFOs,
past
yeah,
couple of years.
more interaction. They were showing
Right.
me by 2027 that they're openly, working with the UFOs. A lot of what they're saying is an agenda also, and I know you're aware of that. It's they have a name for it now. I forgot what it is, Blue
Are
Beam
you
or
talking
something.
about Project Bluebeam?
Yeah, it's create this mock UFO threat to
Right.
centralize everything. So I do see another pandemic threat around 2024,
I
2025 also.
that soon.
That's soon. Yeah, maybe a couple of years after.
I've seen one coming at the end of the decade.
It could
Not
be a little
not
later.
2024, 25. Personally, I've seen like 2028, 2029.
It could be. I mean, I could have the timelines a little bit off, but they're definitely showing me that. But again, it's all fluid. It can change, and that's the
That
beauty of
is true, based on the timelines that
it
we
can all
choose
change.
collectively.
Yeah. Yeah, and the ETs teach us how to shift timelines and how to
Mhm.
do that. So
If if you had to, if just for fun, if you had to place a bet on Bet Rivers or whatever, like when we have official first contact, like we've seen in the movies, where a true extraterrestrial benevolent is meeting like the president of the United States, like what year? And then I'll give you my year that I've
2020,
received.
because that when I was saying that 2026, maybe 2027,
Okay.
I think there's undisclosed ones that are going to happen.
Since Roswell at least, and probably much farther back.
So there's going to be inklings on the news, but
Okay.
this image
that's a lot quicker than I've received. You know what's interesting is that, and maybe I don't know what's accurate within my predictions and what isn't, but I used to have this vision that it would be around that time, 2025, 26. But recently I've been receiving that it's actually 2033, 2034.
Like that, the timelines can change, but they're just showing me, after 2020.
Oh, it'll be interesting to see. And ultimately, this is all just for fun, trying to predict things, really.
That's what I tell people. It's all fluid. Also, they just popped in, that there's going to be more knowledge of the Earth beings or the races that dwell within the Earth.
That is absolutely, yes. That's another thing I've seen for the 2030s is not just official first contact from out there, but also contact with the inner Earth beings, with Kabbalah, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. Right. So a lot of people go out to Mount Shasta.
Right, Mount Shasta. I'll be having a retreat in Mount Shasta next year. That'll be a lot of fun. So, Adam, this has been so wonderful. How can people find all of your stuff? I know you do so much. You post so many videos. How can people find you?
All right, so the YouTube channel is called the Medium Channel.
Yep, and I'll link everything in the description box below. Just look down there for all Adam's stuff.
So we do. Actually, I'm doing almost virtually daily videos now because I started doing the short forms also.
Yeah.
So we have that, and we do a lot of really good stuff there. Now I also have a website. It's AdamBetweenTheWorlds.com. The handle for Facebook and Instagram are both Medium Adam Bernstein. So that's the handle for both of those.
All right. And to everyone out there, if you want to learn the tarot with me, I do have a new round of the tarot course coming up. Starts September 16th. All the information is in the description box below. 13-week course. We meet on Saturdays. It's live, but if you can't make the live calls, you can watch the recordings. And at the end, I'll give you a certification with the number of hours completed with me. And I've churned out several professional readers over the years, and that's my favorite. But also, even if you have no aspirations of becoming a professional and just want to learn to read the cards for fun, it is such a wonderful tool to have that really is a lifelong friend. So you can check all that out below.
Yeah, I love tarot.
Yeah, me too. All right, Adam, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Namaste.
Namaste.